I'd like to describe something I've seen across a number of apps, which I think is important to illustrate. So the other day, I was calling Charles Schwab. So if you're not familiar with Charles Schwab, it's this banking service. You get a credit card, you get all sorts of services along with that, and it's known to be more so on the premium side. Although it doesn't take much to qualify. It isn't one of those banking services where okay, you need a lot of income in order to bank with them, but what I really like about them is there's still this highly premium feel to using their service. For one, they seem to be hyper obsessed on convenience. They're always available 24/7. And then when you do talk to someone, it isn't, this person that's contracted out to another country or this person who seems tired because they're there, you know, desperately waiting for a phone call, or maybe not so desperately in the sense that they don't want a phone call, they're just tired and it's that time of night. That never is the case, right? They're just always thrilled to take your phone call. And it isn't like a thrill in the sense that it's a bit overbearing. There's a toxic kind of enthusiasm about them that seems a bit artificial. It's very sleek, it's very sophisticated, it's very to the point. And they address you as though, a butler would, but with way much more sophistication and knowledge. Um, so that's always been great. But what I found particularly interesting is that I actually had to call them the other day and they had me on hold. They politely told me that I'd be transferred over to another department. But while they were doing that, there was something in the gaps, right? It wasn't like, an automated kind of piano or hold music or elevator music as, it would so often be with other banking services, but it was this automated debrief of the stock market today. Or maybe not today, but maybe the day before, I'm not sure. It was like the State of the Union for the stock market. Now, that actually has two key components, right? First is, I was like, well, what do I have to do with the stock market? I've virtually nothing to do with the stock market. It's an assumption that they're making that I really even care about the stock market. And if this kind of automated debrief for the stock market, the current stock market, or whatever's happening is going to everyone, well, I doubt they would care. But what's sort of the intention behind that, right? The intention is it makes people feel very important, right? You feel as though you're an executive in some high-rise building being told this information as though it matters to you, right? And so if it's being done, then it implies that you're important, right? And so, it's kind of using that gap, like what happens in the gap in most cases, when one person is told that they will be transferred and then they're transferred, what happens in that gap? Well, usually it's just, it's this brain dead, hotel music, and you're just like, you kind of turn the volume down if you don't want to, but you can't turn it too down because you have to hear when the other person picks up. Um, but like I was listening to that, I was like, this is a very premium feeling. It feels as though they're passing on a deep sense of importance to me, right? And sophistication. So I found that really, really interesting. And actually Perplexity, right? If you haven't used Perplexity, it's in the domain of these LLM models. But you use ChatGPT, for instance, and you use Perplexity, and you'll instantly see a difference not necessarily of, output in terms of artificial intelligence. I mean, they're both relatively similar. In fact, I think ChatGPT probably is slightly better. But Perplexity, the way that it has made its app, right? You're on the app and it's not necessarily just an LLM. Like you go to like this news tab. And I found that interesting. I was like, that's nice. There's kind of a news tab. And at that point, it was just at best convenient that there was a news tab. But then what I noticed is, I was just randomly laying down somewhere, and then I got this, beautiful ring. It was like a notification that was really pleasant to listen to. And it was Perplexity notifying me of some kind of cybersecurity threat that happened in Microsoft recently. And then I'm like, because notifications are very personal, that they're in your face. They go right to you. You can't ignore them. But I thought about that and I'm like, and actually I found that news pretty compelling. But the fact that it presents the news to you and it doesn't ask, it implies a sense of importance that you must care about important things. And so you are important. Much in the same way with Charles Schwab, right? If it's doing this automated debrief, again, it implies that I'm important. And so I must, like, this is important information. And if I'm sharing it to you without even asking, well, it implies that you're important. So that was true for the automated message with Charles Schwab. And that was true with, Perplexity just passing me this information. And so it's not necessarily that, oh, I don't, sort of a conventional way of thinking about this is, oh, well, you should probably ask them if they want to hear news about the stock market, in between the gap of being transferred, before you actually make that, a setting for them. Because if they don't, well, if they don't necessarily want to listen to it, then they'll just, be perpetually disengaged, and it will probably be worse than the automated hotel music. And it's like, that's not true. When you sign up for a service or you're starting to use a service, you're gaining the experience, right? So this is like, oh, I'm banking with a premium service. And so this is what comes part and parcel with a premium service. And so what it does is it validates that it is in fact a premium service. When you experience that, you almost feel as though, wow, this is just what comes with banking with a premium service. And then almost you feel compelled to want to know more about the stock market, right? Which everyone kind of feels generally. This is a general sentiment. If you look at the stock market, you're generally, the general impression is that oh, this person's really smart. They're sophisticated. They invest their money. They're wise. They're doing kind of something, stock market analysis is a lot like programming. You're like, wow, you do programming? Maybe not so much today, but certainly, that's kind of the sentiment. So putting things in people's faces that imply putting important things in people's faces, and serving it, right, implies that, well, okay, you like this, like you must like this important thing because you're important. Um, and so, if you've ever used Cursor, for instance, this is like the third product in this, in this kind of trifecta of apps that I'm illustrating do this really well. But Cursor, what it does is, if I was using Cursor and I was like, well, remove the asterisks, I'd much rather just have things boldened. Because what happens is, it'll do the asterisks and then eventually it should render into being bold. But it was giving me output where it was just asterisks, where it just had an asterisk. And so I was like, well, don't give me the asterisks, just, make it bold. And then it's said and done, and most interactive LLMs or whatever nowadays, that's all it will ever be. You will tell it what you want, and it will essentially just give you output. But there was a little pop-up message on the side that was essentially saying user prefers not to have asterisks, but instead just wants things boldened. And it's like, wow, I mean, it could do that on the back end and simply just configure that. And then I'll figure out eventually that, well, it must know that I like things bolden because ever since I mentioned that I like things bolden instead of put into asterisks, it just gives me that output. And I've made that inference before about using other things. But the fact that it makes it apparent that it's doing that, again, passes on a sense of importance to me, right? It basically, I kind of feel not that it's learning on my data in a bad way, although it's doing that, but it's it's learning on my preference, right? Not necessarily learning to you know, increase its quality of function, right? It has a benchmark of how intelligent it is. That's fine. But it's basically now, wow, this is a super intelligent system that's learning things I like or learning to do certain things the way I like. And more importantly, and this is the psychological aspect, it's making it apparent to me, right? And so passing on importance is really important. And as you can see, each of these services have taken advantage of a gap, right? With Charles Schwab, they took advantage of the gap between, calling someone and then being transferred, whereas you'd have, automated music. Here, you have debriefs about the stock market, which makes you feel very important. With Perplexity, you see what they've done with the gap between asking for something and receiving it. Well, sure, you ask and receive, and then that's all it ever is. But they exploited kind of this interesting idea where it can make apparent what we're learning about you so that you know we are geared towards your convenience. And you don't necessarily have to keep reminding us. So if there is back end level intelligence, that should be surfaced and put in the faces of other people to basically indirectly show that we are doing this. And again, they could have said, now we know that you prefer this. Now we're going to essentially do this all the time. They could say that, but it almost has a different kind of mystical effect when you see something being done for you rather than told that this will be done for you from now on. There's like, wow, it's learning about me. This is a really intelligent system. The more I use it, the more it's just anchored towards my preferences. This is really nice. Um, so, and then of course, with Perplexity, again, presenting the news to me, and it doesn't know what kind of news I like. It just assumes I care about the news because important people care about the news, and I'm important. And it's just fascinating. And talking with LLMs, right? So, and this is like the chat feature. If you talk with ChatGPT, for instance, again, you talk to it, it'll tell you what it thinks, and then it'll be a back and forth. Now, with um with with Perplexity, you talk to it, and then in return, it just gives you a bunch of information, sure, in some beautiful manner. Both LLMs did that to begin with, so it's not a big deal. But Perplexity will, if reminding you is a relevant part of that conversation, then it will actually say, "Would you like me to remind you of this?" Right? Just tell me, and I'll do that. So it reveals functionality through experience, which is actually a really important point, right? Because usually, you'll just kind of be told, well, this is our product and these are the pieces of functionality that we offer, and this is how they correlate to what you want. But I had no clue that, Perplexity could remind me of things. And yet I could talk to it and just say, hey, remind me at 4:45 when this happens. So you kind of, and I didn't know that, but so it reveals functionality through experiences. So these two things I think are relatively important. The first is, what I'm calling the God of the gaps. Whenever you're whenever you're building a product, or whenever you're experiencing a product, think about like what kind of gaps take place, right? Like, oh, whenever I'm on the phone, it just so always happens to be the case that when I'm transferred, in between that gap, I always hear automated music. What if there was a service out there, and of course, you shouldn't base your whole business model on there, just, hey, this is what we do what every other banking service does, but all we do is we give you stock market briefings in between a transition. But you know, it's just what if services didn't do that, right? What if services made that gap a part of the experience and not just a waiting time, right? And the same can be said, so that's the God of the gaps. How do you become the God of the gaps, right? Between asking for something and receiving output on an LLM, can I actually inject and say, hey, how can I pass on importance to show them that I'm actually attentive, that my clients, that is, right? Um, I can actually do that by just saying, this is what I've learned, right? This is, again, a God of the gaps. And then the other thing is revealing functionality through experience. You, of course, want to be careful about this. It should only be convenient functionality, and it should be heavily planned and strategic, otherwise it could be missed. So, if you're building an LLM that has a voice feature, um, you should very meticulously plan that, oh, I should be able to reveal these features relatively soon in generalized contexts. Because if it's very niche context, then that functionality through the experience will come, very infrequently. And so, I mean, it will just come infrequently, so it's not necessarily worth it. So you want to make sure that if you are communicating functionality through experience, it is done in a way where that functionality becomes apparent very quickly. Otherwise, it will kind of disappear. And it won't be stumbled on, right? Because again, this is stumbling on something. That's the other thing. You know, every time I've like very quickly adopted a product, it was because I felt as though I stumbled on something where, oh man, if I had this before this, that would be great. That's kind of that is in a sense, the epiphany that I always had. I'm like, man, if I had found this earlier, that'd be great. And I found it by accident. I was just browsing LinkedIn, you know. And so it's like, how does a product communicate? I mean, and I'm very quick to grab it, right? And I'm like, holy shit, that's so relevant. And then I grab it. Well, take a moment there. Just pause. Like, what just happened? What things made you do that quick grab, right? Suddenly I'm downloading it, I'm putting it on my laptop, I have it on my phone, I'm thinking about it. Like, what did that? How minimally, like how much, how like what minimum information did that communicate to breed that level of desperate excitement, right? What was that? So interrogate the gap. Again, this goes back to being the god of the gap. When between uh, experiencing something and choosing to adopt it, right? Seems like I'm talking about a child. I'm not, but a product, a service, right? What happens in that gap? What existed between that and that made you so inclined to do that, right? And the thing is that, and this goes back to a number of things, but usually it is communicating things that give you the least amount of resistance to see if they bring value to you, right? So this actually goes back to what the Darden School of Business has pioneered, specifically a particular professor, where she says, an affordable loss. As you're iterating a product or as you're building it, um, you know, you actually want to think very critically about how can I get information on whether this product is good or not with the minimal number of resources and time spent, right? That's an affordable loss to you to get good feedback and intellect on whether or not a product is worth continuing or continuing in a particular direction. And so, um, affordable loss is also, there's something to be said about affordable loss also being positioned relative to, the consumer, right? What's an affordable loss for them? And so thinking in that manner is, okay, what minimum thing do I have to convey that will give them the least amount of friction to test my product? And they should know that. They should know that it won't take them time to validate the value of this product. Um, and so whenever I stumble on a product, I'm like, oh man, I could just download this now and I don't have to, I don't have to set things up. I don't have to pay for anything. I just download it now and I'll see if it has value. It doesn't take long. And that's part of why LLMs have been so effective in being adopted lately. It's because you don't have to mold yourself into the conventions of any framework. You can type as yourself. It's natural language. It's heavily personal. You don't have to adjust as you come into the experience. You can be entirely yourself and have faith that, whatever kind of back end sorcery is going on, it will parse through that and understand you. And it will understand anything that you might say that you actually didn't intend to say, right? It has that much intelligence. And so there's no friction in that. And you'll see this happen, right? I mean, when Gemini came out, when ChatGPT came out, when Claude came out, when, all these products came out, I think for a while they were kind of behind a sign up, but they figured out very quickly, as competition kind of, became more apparent, that you didn't need to sign up for anything. If you look up Gemini, you were just faced with the Gemini chatbot. There isn't any like sign up for Gemini and then make an account and make a profile and then tell us what kind of things you want. No, just type, just type. And, that's all it'll take. And then you type and then you see the feedback and you're like, wow. And then as you do that, you escalate to a level where, wow, this just keeps getting better. This is actually, I can apply this everywhere. I can use this at work. I can use this, to filter through to filter a doc or, to put this together or to brainstorm. And then, as you ramp up, the more you use, again, there was nothing standing in the way of you using that and coming to those conclusions. It was just a few moments, right? Not even minutes, but moments. So, it could take a few minutes to log in and then use the product, right? Like Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude. But how can we take those minutes and trim them down to moments, right? In a sense, you are actually reducing friction. You're putting your product as quick as you can in the face of as many people as you can. and you elicit a sense of excitement in them, right? Products are toys. I think I heard this said by someone, that products are toys. Kind of imagine yourself at Toys R Us, for instance. You used to walk around, look at different toys, and you used to stumble on one or two or three or four or several at a time, right? Walking through the aisles. And then you see, you're like, wow, like what toy caught your attention? Again, this is the God of the gaps. Between experiencing and adopting, what happened in the gap? Well, so, whatever caught your attention, it did that for a very specific reason. And like, what was that reason? So products are toys because you should feel a sense of excitement to just pick it up and play with it and know whether you like it or not. And that playing with it is actually still true, even though we're not at, Toys R Us at this age, or, most of you aren't, at least I assume if you're watching this. But there's something to be said there, right? There's something to be said there that, you just want to make sure that people know how to play with your toy intuitively because they're going to pick it up. They're going to, like look at it in dozens of different ways and going to probably poke the wrong things. But again, it comes back to strategy. You make sure that they poke the thing. You make sure whatever they poke leads to something, right? And you don't want to over strategize because then it could be complex, but you actually want to preserve that kind of inner child where yeah, you know how this is going to pan out and you know what will elicit excitement. And if you can do that even for people who aren't in your product category, they should still see the use. Then imagine what people who are in the product category will come to, right? They'll see the use very quickly. So put it in their face, exploit the gaps, right? That's the God of the gaps. Usually the God of the gaps was used kind of as a term and is still is used to say, oh, wherever there's a gap in our understanding of the universe, you interject God into that, and that is that in a sense is the God of the gaps, right? Like, oh, people will say, oh, you're using the God of the gaps theory or whatever. And that's, fallacious. But here to be a God of the gaps to find out what gaps exist and then to exploit them. Not necessarily exploit them, but what happens in that dead space, right? It's probably normal to a lot of people, right? For a banking service, it's just automated music. While you wait in a hotel, it's probably just, again, hotel music. Or, while you wait for your Uber, it could just be, that you're just watching the fucking thing go on the map, right? Um, or, the car get closer to you. But like, what else could exist in that gap? You don't know. What's normal to us? The gaps are traditionally normal. No one's paid attention to the gaps. They've paid to how you get interested and what the outcome is of the service. The process is also relatively important, but that process comes with gaps that I think are taken for granted. Um, and so to be a god of the gaps, but then also this was the second thing, to embed importance of conveying, like just being able to convey feature through experience. As I play with the toy, I figure out new things that it's capable of. It gives me this impression that it's actually capable of much more than I thought. If I give you like a sheet of things, right, that, oh, well, my chatbot, is capable of, seven things here there's the predictability there. It kind of just makes things a bit boring, even though you might find each of those features really important, and really useful, super useful. There's a whole facet, a whole dimension here of human psychology where, if you just convey generally what it's used for and you bring people into the loop and get them to use the product in some frictionless way, right? Such that it's, an affordable loss for them to try it out. And then as they use it, meticulously, you've planned how it's going to make apparent that, hey, we're also capable of notifying you. We're also capable of integrating with your calendar and that's through experience. So you feel as though the more I experience it, the better this product is going to get, and the more I'm going to stumble on a gemstone, right? A gemstone being a new feature that I didn't know I wanted. Again, that didn't know I wanted actually ends up being a pretty crucial idea. Um, and so so these two pillars I think are pretty key. God of the gaps, right? And embedding, or rather conveying feature through experience by embedding feature in experience.